Okay. Good evening, and welcome to a special Stevenson Trust for Citizenship event recognizing the 25th anniversary of the Scottish Youth Parliament. I'm Christopher Carman. I'm the Stevenson Professor of Citizenship here at the University of Glasgow. I have to start by coming clean and admitting that we're a bit behind in celebrating the anniversary of the Youth Parliament. Whilst last year we were awash in the discussions and meetings and special events around the 25th anniversary of the Scottish Parliament, what somewhat got overshadowed was that the Scottish Youth Parliament is actually a day older than the Scottish Parliament, and that should be recognized for all that it's done. This evening, though, despite being a bit late, I'm very grateful that the members of the Scottish Youth Parliament were able to join us tonight for this event. In learning about the Scottish Youth Parliament's anniversary, I was quite keen that we here at the University of Glasgow and the Stevenson Trust for Citizenship recognize the occasion. Many of you will know that the university's mission, of course, is to develop and support world changers. And that the Stevenson Trust remit, given to us by our benefactor, Sir Daniel Stevenson in 1921, is to promote education and research into citizenship. The Scottish Youth Parliament clearly brings these elements together. Members of the Scottish Youth Parliament, by being active citizens and taking part and participating in the public affairs of their nation, clearly are world changers. So tonight the plan is to hear from them, to hear from the members of the Scottish Youth Parliament on how the SYP carries out its responsibility of representing Scots between the ages of 12 and 25 in the nation's public affairs. Our speakers will each cover a different area of the SYP's remit, and then we'll open it up for wider questions and discussion. So without further ado, I'll move on to introducing our speakers. Ellie Craig, MSYP, I'm going to mess that up many times, I think, is the chair of the Scottish Youth Parliament and represents Glasgow Cathcart. As chair, Ellie leads the organization and the board of trustees and ensures the SYP's youth-led mandate is at the forefront of everything the SYP does. As well as Ellie's role as chair, she is a trustee of Young Scot, Scotland's national youth information and citizenship charity. Olivia Brown, MSYP, is the vice chair of the Scottish Youth Parliament and is the member for Musselburgh and Midlothian North. Olivia is an active campaigner on issues affecting young people, such as environment and education. Alana Logue is MSYP, is a trustee of the Scottish Youth Parliament and represents Nahaelian an Ir. Alana is currently studying social work at Glasgow Caledonian University and is passionate about Gaelic language education, so I apologize for my pronunciation. Tamsin Gold, MSYP, is trustee of the Scottish Youth Parliament and member of Falkirk West. Tamsin is currently studying law and politics at the University of Glasgow and was formerly convener of SYP's Education and Lifelong Learning Committee. Just to note that we're recording tonight's event and we'll make it available on our website alongside other Stevenson lecture and events, which you can find just by Googling Stevenson Trust, University of Glasgow. And with that, I will turn it over to Ellie, I think, first.
So hello, and thank you for having us along today. So I'm Ellie Craig, I'm the chair of the Scottish Youth Parliament and also the member for Glasgow Cathcart. I'm also going to give a visual description. So this is something we do at SYP to make our events more accessible. So I use she, her pronouns, and I'm wearing a pink blazer. I'm here today because the Scottish Youth Parliament is celebrating our 25th birthday, and we have been very kindly invited to deliver a Stevenson lecture on our work. So who are the Scottish Youth Parliament, or SYP for short? You'll find out a lot more in the next hour and a half, But in two sentences, SYP is the democratically elected voice of Scotland's young people aged 12 to 25. Our vision for Scotland is of a nation that actively listens and values the meaningful participation of its young people. And we'll tell you all about what that means shortly. But first, who are we? So I'm delighted to be joined by three other members of SYP's youth-led board, our Vice Chair Olivia, as well as our two trustees, Alana and Tamsin. Today we're going to use the values of SYP to tell some of the story of the organisation over the past 25 years and how it intertwines with some of the big changes in Scottish politics in that time. We'll also reflect 25 years ahead about these challenges Scotland faces in these areas and the role young people play in addressing these. So that's a lot to get to. I'll start by discussing Scotland's human rights journey and our role in this. Then Alana will discuss promoting and celebrating an inclusive and diverse Scotland. Tamsin will then share young people's role in democracy before Olivia talks about how young people campaign and our role in creating change. Finally, we'll hold a Q&A hosted by Professor Garman, so please do think of your questions as we go. Okay, so on to human rights, starting with that word journey. I believe Scotland is on a human rights journey through the lens of the UNCRC, and I want to explain why I think that. While we're heading in the right direction, we need human rights defenders to champion the rights of children and young people. Now, the UNCRC was ratified by the UK government more than 30 years ago, signalling that we as a country believe children and young people have human rights. Nearly a decade later, in 1999, the Scottish Youth Parliament was formed, one day before the Scottish Parliament, by a group of youth workers who believed Scotland needed a forum for young people to debate, learn about, and ultimately campaign on the issues that matter to them. I've skipped a few steps here, including the work of many children's rights activists, but in 2017, SYP launched our Right Here, Right Now campaign. A year later, my predecessor, Suki, demanded the First Minister incorporate the UNCRC into law. In 2020, the Scottish Government agreed. Then the bill passed in March of 2021. Only a few weeks later, though, it was challenged by the UK Government, which was upheld in the Supreme Court October that year. 2 years later, after a lot of campaigning from young people and others, the Scottish Government published amendments and the newly amended bill passed in December of 2023. So there's the legal journey our rights have been on, from ratification through to incorporation. As you can see, it has been a bit of a winding road with some bumps along the way, which I think is mirrored by the experiences of young people in Scotland accessing their rights. There are certainly positive changes we've seen over the past 25 years in how young people access their rights, but there are also significant challenges still faced. Our 2017 national campaign, Right Here, Right Now, was SYP's first significant involvement in the incorporation of the UNCRC and in calling for that into law. Since then, members of the Scottish Youth Parliament have consulted young people in their areas, written and met with members of the Scottish Parliament, delivered speeches to the Scottish Government, and so much more, with the aim of reaching this point. For example, the quote on the slide says, "I've waited so long that the protections in the UNCRC don't even apply to me anymore." This was part of a speech given by one of my fellow MSYPs to the First Minister and his Cabinet in June of 2023. After all of that work, current MSYPs, former MSYPs, and human rights defenders from across Scotland attended the debate at the Scottish Parliament to see the bill voted in unanimously in December of 2023. Last year, I was at an event where the chair of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, Anne Skelton, was speaking. Anne reflected on just how big a deal it is that Scotland has become the first devolved country in the world to incorporate the UNCRC into law, and particularly on the message that sends. The bill received unanimous support in Parliament twice, which again tells the children and young people who have campaigned for this that their voices matter. As well, last August, I was invited to Taiwan to speak at a conference on children's rights to share our learning from Scotland, showcasing that we've set an example on an international stage. But the work on this doesn't stop here. Earlier, I described Scotland as being on a children and young people's rights journey, and that was deliberate. Reaching incorporation only leads us to the next step on that journey, and that one is even more important: implementation. UNCRC incorporation only means anything if adults and powers address the human rights issues affecting children and young people in Scotland, which is why we are turning to focus our work on creating a culture of human rights amongst decision makers in Scotland. That leads me on to implementation. And while this applies to all of the articles in the UNCRC, at SYP, our priority is on Article 12, the right for children and young people to be heard and taken seriously on matters which affect them. We've been doing this work through a project called The Right Way, which is designed to support and challenge decision makers to uphold Article 12 of the UNCRC by practising the meaningful participation of young people in their work. A key outcome of the project I wanted to highlight today is our Participation Hub. This is a website with, we hope, all the information decision makers, practitioners and officials need to meaningfully engage young people in their work. Central to that hub was young people using an academic model to define what we mean when we say meaningful participation. As a group of young rights champions, we looked at a few and found that the Lundy model of participation best described our experiences of meaningful participation. The online training, which features as part of the hub, includes a short interview I carried out with the academic, Professor Laura Lundy, who developed the model. But to give a brief overview, the model splits Article 12 into two stages, and then those two stages into two further elements. The first stage is the right to express views, which requires the elements of space, including children and young people in safe spaces, and voice, facilitating them to express their views. The second stage is the right to have those views given due weight, which is split into audience, saying the views must be listened to by the right people, and influence, which requires the views to be acted on as appropriate. Professor Laura Lundy first published this model in her 2007 paper, Voice is Not Enough, and this is one of the most highly cited articles ever on children's rights. And finally, on implementation, I also want to highlight the impact that the UNCRC Act is having directly. In the first ever UNCRC Act case a few weeks ago, following an intervention from the Commissioner for Children and Young People Scotland, the High Court in Edinburgh has ruled that the Lord Advocate's power to prosecute children is within the scope of the UNCRC Act 2024. Finally, I want to reflect on what the next 25 years could look like on Scotland's human rights journey. My fellow young rights champions tried to answer what a rights-based culture would look like, and they said they would address the intolerance of childhood and negative public attitudes. People would understand rights and contextualise rights for young people in the areas that they work in. Power dynamics would be considered and addressed. Adults would defend children and young people's rights. Children and young people would learn about their rights from an early age, and media and social media would challenge the stereotypes around children and young people. I'm sorry to say, though, that the winding rights journey we are on is not that simple. There has been a concerning shift away from human rights language within political discourse, where the ideal of universal human rights is being questioned by people in power. As human rights defenders, we need to challenge that and stand up for children and young people's rights. And throughout all of that, young people furthest from their rights should be the priority. Human rights violations should not be seen as something which only happen somewhere else across the world. They are a real problem in Scotland, which is why those who campaign and stand up for human rights need to passionately call this out and work to address. I'll now pass over to Alana to speak about the importance of inclusion and diversity in our work.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Good evening, everybody. My name is Alana Logue. I use she, they pronouns. I have long dark hair and I'm wearing a black top and a black and white skirt. I'm one of the MSYPs for Nellin and Year, which is the Western Isles, and I'm also a trustee on the Scottish Youth Parliament Board. As Ellie explained, I'm going to talk about one of our key values as an organisation, inclusion and diversity, how we use it internally, campaign for it in Scotland, and reflecting on the past 25 years and what I think the next 25 years could look like in creating a diverse and inclusive Scotland. This is one of our key values because it ensures that we accurately include the views of young people across Scotland in our work and celebrate their diversity too. Internally, we also have specific, wrong thing. So as I said, to represent young people effectively, we need to reflect on Scotland's young people and include people from all backgrounds. We know that we are able to do this because we conduct a census of our membership every term. As an organisation, we are very diverse. In our current membership survey, we've discovered that 55% of our membership identifies women or girls, 38% identify as a boy or a man, and 5% identify as non-binary. 1/3 of our membership come from an ethnic minority background, 10% of our membership are CARE experience, 12% are young carers, and 42% of the membership have a visible or invisible disability. I'm hugely proud to be part of an organisation as diverse as this. With a diversity of backgrounds often comes a diversity of thought, experiences and perspectives, and this hugely benefits our work. I think that the Scottish Parliament, for example, should continue the work that they're doing to bring a greater diversity to their membership to gain some of these benefits. Internally, we also have specific partnerships and programmes which ensure that we are being inclusive of young people from different backgrounds. The Scottish Youth Parliament has 2 representatives from each Scottish Parliament constituency, as well as representatives from our national voluntary organisations, such as Girl Guiding, Scouts, Who Cares Scotland, Carers Trust Scotland, the RNIB, and many more. These partnerships ensure that we are specifically representing certain groups and also give us the ability to consult and engage with a wider audience of young people that they work with. While our organisation is diverse, it requires more to make people from different experiences feel included. So, we have developed specific programmes to support with that. We have a group of anti-racist champions are working towards our next level of the LGBT inclusive charter journey with our partnerships at LGBT Youth Scotland. And we also have a group that I am delighted to be a member of, our Women's Empowerment Programme. Over the past few years, we have created protected spaces to upskill and empower young women to take on leadership roles within the organisation. I'm really delighted to say, well, at least in part, that as a result of this, SYP elected our first all-women board last summer, which the 4 of us are all a part of. I also want to highlight the work of other groups at SYP who I spoke to before coming along today. One of our groups who has inspired me in my work are the young carers who work with us. So I reached out to one of the MSYPs from Carers Trust, and here is what they told me about their inclusion work at SYP. I quote, "As a young carer, I care for my mum, dad, and brother. This role ranges from a day-to-day basis, depending on how my cared for people are feeling. But throughout my role, I do the cleaning of the house, the washing of the clothes, cooking meals, buying shopping for the household, and taking my family to various appointments. I have been a young carer since I was around 7 when my dad first became unwell and my mum required support in caring for my brother. She has since developed her own illness, which requires me to look after her when she needs me to. Being a young carer is rewarding, but it's also exhausting. When I was 18, I was a young carer as well as attending college, working, and trying to maintain a social life. It's too much for one person to take on." They continue by saying, in SYP, a young carer MSYP and myself had a motion passed about guidance teachers in schools becoming trained in young carers and how to identify young carers. From this, we've started to work out how to allow teachers to take part in training and giving schools the resources that they need to make sure that young carers are identified and allowed access to the correct support. As a young carer, I have seen firsthand how my needs have not been met, especially within education. Diversity and inclusion simply means to me that everybody is included, needs are met, and it's due to honest want of everyone being involved instead of a box-ticking exercise. To be heard meaningfully to me means that others don't just listen, but they ask questions, they act upon what they've heard and work out what they can do to help. 1 in 5 children in a classroom are young carers. However, you rarely hear or see any work being done to benefit us. One example I can think of, though, is in 2023, I spoke to the Oxfam National Outcome on Care Roundtable, and I had MSYPs, staff members, and different charities asking questions, such as, what can we do to help you and others? Just to be asked this by a decision maker, that is the best feeling ever. It's even better when there's action that comes from what you've told them. I hope these powerful words inspire you as much as they inspired me. Promoting inclusion within SYP gives us a legitimacy to campaign effectively on inclusion issues externally. Perhaps most notably was our work campaigning for equal marriage. I'm hugely proud to be part of an organisation that's helped secure this landmark legislation change. This campaign was before my time at SYP, but I did reach out to a staff member who was involved then, and they shared how inspiring the moment our Love Equally campaign, was successful. They said, "I remember there being a Love Equally march down the Royal Mile with thousands of people that attended. It was like a pride march specifically for marriage equality. SYP, along with the Equality Network, LGBT Youth Scotland and Stonewall Scotland, held a photo shoot outside Parliament with people in wedding outfits. SYP also sent every MSP a Valentine's Day card asking them to vote for the bill. We worked really closely with the Equalities Network, LGBT Youth Scotland and Stonewall Scotland to get this over the line. It was a huge deal when the bill was tabled." They continue by saying, "I was there for the vote in Parliament and the debate beforehand, so clapping isn't usually allowed in the debate chamber. The debate had a huge cross-party consensus with MSPs giving their personal experiences, stories, and experiences of their friends or family, which was really nice. After the vote, the whole chamber started clapping in the public gallery, which rarely happens, and we were all stood up. The gallery was full. and clapped the MSPs, for passing it. 105 votes in favour with 15 against. There was a big party nearby where all MSPs and campaigners celebrated. All campaigning like this, the centering of lived experience in seldom heard groups is what creates success such as this. So there's been a lot of successes in creating a more diverse and equal Scotland over the past 25 years, many of which SYP has played a part in, but I won't pretend I don't think that there are challenges facing us going forward in the next 25 years. I'll start by asking a question. Can we imagine an inclusive Scotland that celebrates our diversity in 2050? The rise in misogynistic behaviour within recent years is appalling. The main example used in this context are people such as Andrew Tate. However, if we look closely at the more influential people closer to home, such as politicians or business owners, or even people that we just surround ourselves with day to day, many behave in the same way. Why are these people not called out for their influence? The example of Andrew Tate almost feels disconnected because he's a loudmouthed influencer only seen online whose entire purpose is to get a rise out of others. There is so much influence both in person and online, some of it good, but some of it bad. Another challenge that we face is the education system, which needs to be a key part in positive influence. This is struggling to combat discrimination. I think that education is vital when combating discrimination, as knowledge creates ease and ignorance creates defence. Despite those challenges, I want to end on a positive note. I personally, and I'm sure as many of you would agree, would like to see a more accepting society free from discrimination. Everyone in this room has influence. Whether you're a student or a lecturer, use your knowledge to educate and empower others. This way, we can create a kinder and safer society. I'm now going to hand over to Tamsin, who's going to talk about democracy.
Thank you, Alana. I'm Tamsin Goals. I'm one of the MSYPs for Falkirk West. My pronouns are she, her. I have long dark hair and I'm wearing a black top. I'm going to move on to touch on democracy. Its central role in the work of the Youth Parliament and what I believe that tells us about young people's role in a democratic society. Democracy and SYP are intertwined. Everything we do is based off democracy, from our manifesto to our elections to our board, and so much more. We represent our peers to decision makers, and in order to do that, it's essential that we both have a mandate from them and an understanding of their views. To uphold this, we hold internal and external elections for the role of MSYPs, but also leadership roles within the organisation. Every 2 years, our members are elected by the young people they will be representing, with the 4 of us last elected just over a year ago. Elections take place in every constituency in Scotland, and thousands of young people turn out to vote both online and in person. Our elections ensure that it is the constituents, all of Scotland's 12 to 25-year-olds, that have the ability to vote for the young people who will be championing their rights and for the issues that matter to them. All candidates create a manifesto when they're campaigning to try and make themselves appeal to the young people in their area. If a young person is lucky enough to be elected to an area, they begin to work to make their manifesto promises come to life. Our elections are supported by youth work services who set up the elections in their local area, which is essential to the success of the Youth Parliament. Our members then vote to select conveners and deputy conveners of our subject committees and also our board of trustees, which the 4 of us sit on. The average age for a charity trustee in the UK is 57, so having a board made up entirely of people under 25 is extremely rare. Also central to our focus on democracy is consultation with constituents and peers, and a large majority of that relies on youth work services. In some instances, we set up our own consultations and send them out to youth clubs and services, schools, universities, colleges, libraries, and anywhere else where young people may spend a large chunk of their time. These help to inform the debates that we hold at our national sittings. We also create a youth-led manifesto every 5 years through consultation with Scotland's young people. Our current manifesto consultation is open right now as we ask young people across Scotland to tell us what our priorities should be for both the next Scottish election and the next parliamentary session. So we'd love if you and anyone you know aged 12 to 25 would be able to help us by filling in our consultation, and the QR code will be on the slides at the end. Democracy is not just a value for how we work, but also what we promote. We don't and shouldn't take democratic systems for granted, and so over the past 25 years, we have stood up for young people's role in a democratic society. Our Votes at 16 campaign helped to give 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote in all Scottish Parliament and Scottish Council elections, beginning with the Scottish independence referendum in 2014, as well as changing the electoral landscape, forcing politicians to consider the views of young people more actively. This has also given many young people more power to stand up for what they believe in. However, the Votes at 16 campaign is growing rapidly and is now getting attention UK-wide. Two of my fellow MSYPs recently attended a Votes at 16 conference in Belfast last year as Northern Ireland's young people continue their campaign. And an MSYP also attended a Votes at 16 seminar at University College London very recently, looking at how to make a success of UK Labour's announcement that they support votes for 16 and 17-year-olds. This shows that while voting uptake is still low from the younger portion of society, there is still work going on to hopefully elevate those rates. As well as this, the UK Youth Parliament will debate Votes at 16 at their sitting in Westminster at the end of this month, at which SYP will have 16 representatives. Finally, like others, I want to look ahead at young people's role in democracy over the next 25 years, where I think there are several challenges but also opportunities to make real a Scotland where young people play a more active role in determining key decisions. Young people are the least likely to vote in elections, which often gives off the incorrect narrative that young people are the least politically engaged, which is not true. Young people are the most likely to protest and sign a petition showing clear political engagement, which begs the question about why fewer young people are choosing to vote while still being politically engaged. One argument that can be made is surrounding political education and political literacy, especially in schools. Personally, I did not receive much, if any, political education until I was 6, when I took higher politics, but I had to complete that with another school, and I only got face-to-face teaching in a classroom once. The rest was online, which left me to do a lot of the learning myself without much support. The quality of political education in Scotland is low compared to other subjects, and there is a very real possibility that this is why many young people are not voting, as they're having to seek out the opportunity of that themselves. While this is a challenge, I think there's a clear opportunity to fix this, alongside the ongoing reform of our education system, to support young people not just to remember something to pass an exam, but to develop critical thinking and become more active citizens. Finally, I think MSYPs have a real role to play in this. As we turn 25 years old this year, Scotland has one of the most established youth parliaments in the world. We have unique relationships with youth workers across Scotland and access to decision makers that gives our work genuine influence. As representatives of young people, we can play a special role in creating connections between communities of young people and decision makers. When this works, we can also show our peers that when political engagement works well, it has the ability to genuinely improve their lives, whether that is free bus travel for under 22s, declaring a climate emergency, or UNCRC incorporation. We have to show young people that their political engagement matters for them to want to take part in the system. I'll now hand over to Olivia to talk about political impartiality.
Hi everyone, my name is Olivia. I am Vice Chair at SYP. I've been an MSYP for the last 3 years and I have she, her pronouns. I have sort of grey suit on, black top and long brown hair. So I will be discussing political impartiality as our final value. It is essentially a vehicle by which we influence, to put it simply. We've used this over the last 25 years to do so, and we will use it over the next 25. I'm going to talk about how this informs our ability to campaign for change and why I think the world needs more people campaigning in good faith. Over the last few years, there has been a culture shift in how decision makers perceive young people. Many have recognised that young people are really powerful political actors, as well as being an important current and future voting demographic. An example I'd give would be the Black Lives Matter movement, which was primarily mobilised on Instagram and TikTok by Gen Z and millennials, and then went on to become a really deciding factor in the 2020 election. Attitudes towards SYP have equally changed, and to put it bluntly, a lot of people take us seriously now, which is really nice. But paradoxically, the wider political environment is more partisan and polarised than ever, which leaves SYP's value of political impartiality a bit of an anomaly. In the current political climate, with the advancing of AI and disinformation, most recently Meta ceasing its independent fact-checking, information in the media is more and more biased and often incorrect. The ramifications are evident not only in the behaviours of politicians, but young people themselves. We are seeing right now, as Alana mentioned, a concerning rise in the normalisation of far-right views held by young men, especially around women's rights. But even more concerning, a survey recently found that more than half of Gen Z are in favour of the UK becoming a dictatorship, believing that it would be better off. This disillusionment with and backsliding of democracy is being fueled by political parties and leaders across the world, frankly, and it is becoming an increasingly toxic political environment. SYP's aim with political impartiality is to bridge that gap, giving fair and nuanced views on current issues and placing young people's concerns firmly on the agenda by engaging impartially with all those who are willing to listen to and work constructively with us. We also provide young people the opportunity to explore their political beliefs in a safe environment based on consultation, fact, and research. And this value essentially forces us as an organisation into a more reasonable way of doing politics, and this is something that we want to see reflected better across the political sphere. So how can impartiality be used as a tool for good? We essentially use it as a means to prove that we are campaigning in good faith. A really good case study would be the beginnings of post-COVID education reform, which represented a real shift for us and just quite how useful this value was. After the COVID exam cancellations, it was announced that the Scottish Qualifications Authority was being replaced, and essentially everything was on the table for what the new body might look like. As we began to campaign on this, our asks were often perceived as quite radical. For example, young people want continuous assessment instead of exams. They want practical skills to be taught in classrooms. They want their extracurriculars and youth work to contribute to their awards. But we also demonstrated that young people had a really in-depth understanding of what was quite a complex problem at the heart of our educational system. And with many decision makers, we won the argument that we need a more progressive way of awarding qualifications to our young people. As a result of our hard work, we were involved in complex reviews, such as the independent review of assessments and qualifications led by Professor Louise Hayward, the recommendations of which reflected those asks of young people. Among many other things, I now sit on the SQA's National Qualifications Strategic Advisory Group, got that out in one breath, and most recently, a group of MSYPs gave evidence to the Scottish Parliament's Education Committee. Through our good faith engagement with decision makers, including non-political ones, we demonstrated that our sole priority was young people and their rights. That leads me on to talk a bit about our current campaigns, which MSYPs select every 2 years. These become essentially our top priorities for each membership, and our current ones are based on consultation with more than 4,000 young people. The first one that I'll touch on is gender-based violence, with a particular focus on making misogyny a hate crime and taking an intersectional approach to eradicating it in all areas of society, whilst including young men and boys in the process. On top of that, we have mental health. We are asking that all people who work with young people be mental health trained and that those adults have access to resources that meet the needs of young people today. Our final focus is youth work. We essentially are asking that funding is sustained and increased, which is easier said than done, but we are looking to build a more meaningful discussion between government, local authorities, young people, and their youth workers. So only 3 easy points. We've got, you kind of see as we have began to campaign on these just how interlinked they are, and that, you know, mental health is important to eradicating gender-based violence, and youth work is an underpinning factor in all of that. Already we have brought these to the First Minister and his cabinet, who we meet with once a year, and continue to engage with opposition parties and other stakeholders on them. This is where political impartiality serves us so well. Quite simply, if they're interested in improving the lives of children and young people, we are interested in working with them. So how can we use this as a tool to campaign for change over the next 25 years? I do believe that political impartiality engenders a more reasonable and united politics. We at SYP have demonstrated it as a key means by which we get our campaign wins. It is absolutely vital that we preserve politically impartial spaces, and there are a number of ways I think that we can begin to do this. Alana and Tamsin touched on it, but to reinforce, education is such a vital component of this. Young people need to be given the information to form their opinions and the vocabulary to express them. An understanding of how our political system works should be integral to our curriculum. We also need to place more value upon impartial news. Our news agenda is often led by polarised topics designed to get attention and clicks, but surveys show that across generations, there still is a real appetite for impartial journalism. Young people and everyone should be supported to scrutinise and critically think about the news they read and the sources they get it from. Last but not least, and I really don't think enough emphasis can be placed upon this one, but that is the need for role models. It has been completely normalised that no political discussion can be reasonable and measured. We should encourage politicians to be more respectful of each other and understanding of the nuances within each debate. We know this is possible because we do it at SYP every day. I'll touch on our manifesto as well, because over the next 25 years, we will continue to base our advocacy on human rights and consultation. We're currently in the process of developing our 2026 manifesto, which will see us through the next Scottish Parliament, as well as our new strategy, which will make sure we as an organisation are adapting to the modern political environment. So, if you take one thing away from this lecture today, it should be to take young people seriously. As demonstrated, we have the ability to sway elections and change really important policy. If you give young people the right tools and listen to them properly, then you get votes at 16, UNCRC incorporation, free bus travel and equal marriage. If you sustain that support, eventually you will get the eradication of gender-based violence, a flourishing youth work sector, an end to the mental health crisis, and so much more over the next 25 years. Thank you.
Oh, I was going to grab that. Right, I'd like you to. Okay. Right, well, thank you all very much for your remarks and comments. I'm learning an awful lot about the Scottish Youth Parliament, and I'm very pleased to learn what you're doing. I think it's interesting in listening to your comments, the extent to which the Scottish Youth Parliament seems to have made a conscious effort to make sure it includes the founding principles that were used to set up the Scottish Parliament: openness, transparency, equality, where some may have thought that the Scottish Parliament may have diverged a little bit from some of those initial ideals. It seems that the Scottish Youth Parliament certainly is trying to hold on to this. So it's very interesting to hear what you're doing. Right, the idea is to open it up for questions and discussion now. And with that, we'll take questions from everyone. Robert's going to very kindly run around with the microphone for us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. First of all, congratulations on having 4 speakers and still managing to keep to time. I will tell you that some of your elders, even if given all of the platform for themselves, do not necessarily succeed in doing that. You've talked a lot about human rights this evening. Debates about human rights, however, move on. They raise new debates, sometimes quite fierce debates. There are a couple that are obviously currently going on in our society. One is about transgender people. And I'm interested in what, if anything, you've done about in the debate about, in particular, as far as younger people is concerned, whether or not puberty blockers should or should not be made available to people who have gender dysphoria. The second one, of course, is a bill currently going through the current Scottish Parliament, which is the issue of assisted dying, which in the Scottish version at least could well be a right that's given to people from the age of 16. So, and again, fiercely debated, and whose rights should we respect, et cetera, et cetera. So I wonder if you can give us any guidance as to what the Parliament has said, done, or anything on these two issues.
I might take the second bit of your question there around assisted dying, because we don't have any specific policy, I believe, in the Youth Parliament on it. But I think the one thing that stuck out to me about that debate, and I think I'm focusing probably particularly on the UK's side of it, but I think this debate has proven that we can still have a nuanced, respectful debate in politics. I think it had the potential to be incredibly toxic and polarized, and actually the fact that it was a free vote for MPs has meant that a lot of them are doing really thorough research around it and proving that we can, recognize that everyone has a different experience, everyone has a different opinion, and people who are different sides of that spectrum are still able to say, okay, I understand where you're coming from and why your stance is this. So I don't believe we have any policy specifically on it, but I think it has represented that there is still that element for a kind of bit more political impartiality and a bit less polarization in our politics, and that space still exists.
Yeah, I think the two issues that you highlight are really sort of difficult issues, and I think that the wider political sphere find it difficult to debate these issues in a sort of respectful way. And I think we're really keen that we don't shy away from hard topics like that. And I think on sort of, say, the Gender Recognition Act, that is something that we engaged in and we submitted a consultation response to, like we do all bills that pass through the Scottish Parliament that we feel are relevant to our work. We base all of our work, as we've said, in consultation directly with children and young people. And so in doing that, we found that young people do support trans rights, and we champion that as an organisation who has a value of inclusion and equality and creating accessible spaces. And I think that having a strong evidence in consultation with young people sort of shows that, and we don't tend to sort of take an approach to a debate, as Olivia has said, which is polarising. So yeah.
You're right about when people are transgender. People who are younger people are more likely to be in favour of easing the rules on gender recognition. On the other hand, younger people are less likely to be in favour of the assisted dying legislation.
Yeah, I think we've not done consultation recently with young people on the assisted dying bill, so I'm not sure where it is at now. We did previously have policy. I don't remember how out of date it is now, but I think that throughout all of these issues, young people are not one sort of homogenous group. They have different understanding and experiences of these things. So it's about trying to make sure that all young people have a chance to voice their opinion, whether that be through us or through filling out the consultation on these different things themselves. But it's about sort of changing that attitude that young people sort of are too silly or don't understand these really tricky topics. And we want to sort of provide access to the tools that they need to be able to get involved in political decision making like that.
Yeah, and I also think like there are certain things that we don't have policy on because young people essentially haven't, or MSYPs haven't presented them to us as of recent. We also don't have policy on things like Scottish independence or Brexit because they are just so incredibly divisive. But what we do in those spaces is we encourage young people to educate themselves. Just because we don't have policy on it doesn't mean that we can't point young people in the direction of here's reliable research, form your own opinion about it and advocate for yourself on it. So yeah.
So while somebody's thinking of a question, I'll come in. So on your website, you've said that you respond to a lot of the legislation that's going through the Scottish Parliament. The website, for anybody who wants to look at it, lists the responses and makes them available. Can you just sort of walk us through what the process is that the Parliament goes through when coming up with the responses to the legislation? Because I don't quite understand the process itself. So.
Yeah, there's quite a few different ways in which we do this. We're quite not we're thorough and robust with it, but like we have a lot of different avenues by which we do it. So one way is consultation workshops when usually people from that area of government will pay us to do consultation with young people. And we do all of the analysis and present it to them and whatnot, and that is our response. But we also just respond to things on the website, the way that the public and organisations can do with Scottish legislation. And we will consult with our MSYPs about that. A lot of the time we have committees within the Scottish Parliament, so we'll go to whatever specific subject committee has an interest. We'll speak to the MSYPs who are actively campaigning on it. And occasionally we get our MSYPs to properly go out and do a larger consultation with more of their constituents. So it's very much a kind of youth-led sort of process in the sense that we only respond to the consultations that are that young people are interested in.
Oh, suddenly hands. Right. I'll just work our way around this way, that way, then.
Hello, that was really interesting hearing about all your great work. I wanted to ask you about the Lundy model around Article 12 that you put up. So stage 1 was the right to express views, and stage 2 was the right to have views given due weight. So my question for you is, who decides what is due weight? And given that that is open to so much interpretation, does that mean that the Article 12 really isn't as robust as you might want it to be?
Yeah, so I think you have kind of hit the nail on the head with the sort of question, and that due weight is a legal term that just means, I think, acted on as appropriately. But the second half of the model, which talks about audience and influence, specifically influence, which is sort of the power in which young people's views have to make change. I think that now that the UNCRC is incorporated into law, a lot of that power is sort of legal now, and that they have to consider it, and that there's a lot more sort of backing to actually give the sort of views power. But as you've seen over the 25 years on the various issues that we've campaigned on and the decision makers that we've campaigned to, there's sort of been a varying degree of how much power and influence those views have actually had. And so while we present a model of Article 12 in which in our organisation we give due weight to sort of all of the opinions young people give us, we can't say the same for sort of external engagement. And I think it's something that we just advocate for. And that is why it being protected in law is so important now. But obviously we would wish that sort of young people's views and opinions have as much weight as every other stakeholder, but that is not always the case, which is why our work is still ongoing.
Thanks very much. That was really interesting. And one of the questions that you raised or a statement you made me think more deeply and want to follow up. And it was, Tamsin, your comment that the quality of political education is low in Scotland compared with other subjects in Scotland. And that, coupled with the fact that Scotland is fairly distinctive in having voting at 16 for local elections, is probably a slightly uncomfortable combination. So I guess my question is for you, but also for everyone on the panel. If you could redesign political education in Scotland, what would it look like? What would be its key features?
I think the most important way would be for it to be presented in a way that all young people have the opportunity to access it. So for me personally, it wasn't taught at my school. I think it was only taught at 1, maybe 2 in the local authority. And I think that's mirrored. Yeah, like it's not taught in a lot of schools. And so you have to seek it out. It's not right there in front of you. And I think in an ideal world, it would be an option on course choice forms, and it would be promoted quite frequently. I only knew about it because my friends did it at the school that I ended up doing Teams calls with. But I think without the ability for it to just be there, it's quite hard for young people to access. And if they don't know that it's there, then they're not going to ask about it. Because it wasn't given to me as an option on my form. I had to ask about it and chase it up. And I think you're right, like the fact that we have votes at 16 but don't have very strong political education does make for quite an imbalance. And I think in an ideal world, we'd have stronger political education, which would then allow for more young people to vote because they'd feel more informed and they would have more of a platform to ask questions and have them answered. Yeah, I think there's aspects of it that should be universal within schools. I think it would be hard to embed a full class dedicated to it, especially in the higher up you go in the school where you're picking your own choices. But I think elements of it should be put into different classes to, you know, whether it's like PSE, just so that young people have the opportunity to at least have a flavour of political education somewhere.
And there's the confusion too about sort of modern studies being, oh, well, that's political education. And, you know, even a relatively shockingly small percentage of schools have modern studies, let alone a more broad sort of thing that you're talking about, I think. Yeah.
So my question is around that concept of political impartiality, and especially given that I would assume, and I think probably it's a good assumption, that most of the policies that you push for and all the campaigns that you lobby for are progressive in nature. How do you navigate being impartial in the sense of not aligning with a given party, and especially nowadays that there's that sense of polarization? How do you maintain it, and are there any kind of red lines of actors that you would not engage with in that sense?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it is, to be so frank, something that can be really difficult to navigate. And I think what we always fall back on, because most of our policies are very progressive, because that tends to be young people's views. And what we fall back on is that they are based on consultation with young people, and that is our sole priority, that is our sole motivator. And so politicians, when we meet with them, and not just politicians, just any sort of decision maker or any individual with influence, they can be assured that we are in that room with no ulterior motive. Like, our priority there and our agenda there is to support young people to have their voices heard. And whether the politician in question disagrees or agrees with that policy is a whole other matter, but we are there because young people have told us that that's what they think.
All right, I think we'll shift over to, I get to call on the presiding officer, which I don't think many people get to do.
Thank you all. I mean, just such an interesting evening, and it's fair to say, sitting here learning a lot. I think I had the privilege of co-chairing your session in the Scottish Parliament a few weeks ago with Ellie, and I was absolutely struck with the fact that issues were debated passionately and properly and very, very courteously. And, you know, as has been noted, that perhaps isn't always necessarily the case in our own parliament, where passions can become somewhat inflamed and people are very strident. So very interested to hear what you say about the attraction of impartiality. And I think it is part of your success. And to be honest, I can't really recall a campaign of the Scottish Youth Parliament that hasn't been successful. And I think that, you know, it speaks a lot to the fact you've consulted, but obviously you're doing very well too in terms of diversity. But I was just interested there in the fact that not all young people have access to this kind of education, whether you think that's having an impact on those who may also want to become members of the Scottish Youth Parliament, you know, what we can do together to raise awareness. But I think the big question of the moment, I mean, we have the missing million in Scotland, people who never, ever vote. We saw a remarkable change in the referendum, but generally that hasn't been sustained or reflected. And, you know, the recent poll that suggested that there was a significant cohort of young people who are fairly relaxed about whether or not democracy was the answer. Well, indeed, I think even had reflected that there was another better way to do things. Just be interested in whether or not that's something that you're going to tackle as a youth parliament. I mean, it's obviously concerning all of us who are, you know, just very, very much
well, campaigning constantly for democracy, and it has never faced the threats that it does these days. I think personally, social media has turned the world on its head. There are many pluses there in terms of everyone can engage, but there are dangers too, particularly with the way the technology can be used and abused. So I'd just be really interested to hear your views on how we can work together to protect and enhance and promote democracy and get more people involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, hello. Thank you very much for your question. Just going off of the social media and kind of misinformation that you were talking about before, we, as an organisation, everything that we put out is obviously fact-checked and true, but we also have a group called Mind Your Time. I think it's not 100% sure on what the information is on the website or something like that, which promotes kind of a good use of screen time, but also how to spot misinformation and things. So that's kind of the work that we're doing around misinformation on social media right now, because it is rife and it is disgusting, some of it. But yeah, we as an organisation and we as MSYPs follow a set code of conduct which goes around like social media and misinformation.
I think more wider as well, your question around sort of how we can get more people engaged in sort of democracy. I think that's, we sort of use the term political education, but I think more wider it's about sort of citizenship education and actually young people understanding why they should get involved in democracy. So I think you hear a lot of young people nowadays sort of saying, oh, I'm not political, or I don't really care about politics, because there's a misunderstanding of what politics actually covers and how their voice could actually create change. So that's why young people might not vote, but as Olivia said in her speech, might be sort of turning out to sort of protest and demonstration. And it's because I think young people are disenfranchised with the political system because they don't see themselves reflected in it. So that's why we need things like more young people in politics as representatives. We've seen the average age of a politician fall in the past sort of 25 years of our existence, but I think it's about empowering more people to get involved from a younger age. And that does start with education. And I think it's also about young people being listened to and sort of seeing, that's our main aim as an organisation, but when you see policies which are for young people made by the people that are voted in, then young people are going to sort of have more trust and faith in democracy than they do now, as opposed to sort of seeing it as the typical sort of old man's club, which is maybe it's been seen in previous years.
Yeah, I was also going to add, so much of this, I think, goes back to money. I think we've just experienced 10 years of quite difficult financial decline, and we continue to. And it kind of checks out in political theory that this happens sort of every 100 years. And afterwards, we see a rise of populism because we want to look for, frankly, easy answers to quite complex questions. And I think Ellie makes an excellent point around not only education, but also citizenship. And because youth work services have been defunded and because schools have been defunded, young people don't necessarily feel a part of society, and therefore they don't realise that they have a stake in it by voting or by engaging in politics. And so we need to support young people to understand that their vote really does matter and can make a difference. But also, as we talked about today, there are so many other avenues by which they can make their voices heard. And then, as Ellie says, the way to complete that loop is that young people are listened to.
Yeah, thank you everyone for 4 really interesting and stimulating presentations. I've got quite a specific question, Ellie. I think it was you that mentioned in passing the work of the Children and Young Persons Commissioner. You may be aware that there's a piece of work underway at the Scottish Parliament to look at the complete landscape of commissioners that we have in Scotland, with a view to seeing if we have too many and if that needs to be rationalised. I'd be interested to hear how much value the Youth Parliament places in having a separate independent young persons commissioner, and what concerns the Youth Parliament might have if that was to change.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And as all of our work is based in consultation, we haven't asked young people what they think. But from my experiences and sort of working with the Children and People's Commissioner, I think what's really important for me about one concern, if we don't have a specific sort of Children and People's Commissioner, would be that young people very often those who aren't accessing their rights in the way they should be don't have advocates. And in my head, the Children and People's Commissioner sort of works as a space where young people who are having their rights not met have an advocate to sort of take it to the courts. We saw it with the first case of the UNCRC Act. And I think that not having a specific team to specifically look at children's rights when there's so many children's rights abuses happening here in Scotland would be a real failure to children and young people who do not have enough tools themselves to sort of call out when that's happening.
Thank you. Ellie, so when we were in Belfast last September, you know, I remember we were having this conversation, we spoke on a panel together, and we kind of had this really interesting part about Votes to 16, and we talked all about the success that we as Youth Parliament had in that. And then we were kind of asked, well, what lessons do you have from Scotland about what we could do here in Northern Ireland? Our response was, don't do what we did and don't leave it to the adults to do it themselves. And the kind of image of what we were told citizenship education should be in this country is that children line up in a class and sit and listen to a PowerPoint and get told there's 129 MSYPs and, you know, this part does this and whatever. And I think the bit that's maybe not come out in the conversation just yet is actually what we kind of reflected there was the role of youth work in educating young people about their rights and about their role in democracy. So I wonder if you have any thoughts to share on that.
I can go first and see if anyone else wants to jump in. I think it will be no surprise that we're a really big advocate for young people to have spaces outside of formal education to sort of learn about their rights, learn about sort of political decision making and sort of take part in participation processes like the Scottish Youth Parliament is a youth work organisation, but it also happens at a local level in local youth forums. And I think that while we have an education system which is so focused on exams and qualifications and not on developing young people's social skills and looking after their well-being and mental health, we're not going to get well-rounded young people who understand the importance of taking part in politics and democracy. And so then are too focused on an exam to even sort of think about why there might be a benefit to going out to a polling station at 16 or 17. So I think, yeah, to answer your question, Marcus, which I'm sure you already know the answer to, yes, youth work is really important for that. And especially after COVID, sort of young people were very isolated and didn't have access to a lot of these connections. So they're maybe behind in developing those sort of skills, which is why now more than ever, we need to fund community organisations.
Obviously I'm from quite a rural area, so youth work in my local constituency is absolutely vital, not just for kind of engaging with things outside of school, but also for the social aspect. People don't realize how spaced out the Western Isles is and how difficult it is to get from place to place, and having these spaces for young people is vital for them, just even to have like connections outside of school, and become more well-rounded and become more socialized. It was a very big thing that recently, like say like this time last year, they were trying to shut our local youth cafe and young people were outraged, they were disgusted. So they campaigned a lot, with the help of myself and then obviously local youth workers and things, and we managed to get it back. But yeah, youth work is absolutely essential, especially for those of us up in the middle of nowhere. So
Graham, up there. Well, Robert's heading to Graham. So far, you've talked a fair bit about involvement and participation. And I'm trying to think of how to phrase this exactly, but basically it's sort of, how do we break this catch-22 situation? So what you've told us is that there's a problem with young people not participating because there's sort of a lack of feeling of that it actually sort of matters, right? But we know that constituencies that get listened to quite often tend to be the people who of a particular age who tend to turn out in high numbers and that sort of thing. So how do you, what would be your prescription for how you go about breaking this issue with young people not participating because they don't feel listened to, but they're not listened to because they don't participate? And we sort of end up with this sort of cycle that, I mean, you've mentioned sort of, well, we can tell people about their rights and citizenship outside of school. do people really want to spend their time on a Saturday learning about rights and participation? Maybe some do. People who join and actively campaign for the Scottish Youth Parliament, perhaps. But so just to sort of push you a little bit, what would you how would you recommend that we go about trying to break this cycle?
Yeah, I can start. I think right now there is a culture of it seen as a separate issue and it's added extra. But I guess we would probably all hope that in the future it's sort of just integral and young people sort of grow up with their rights being respected and with being involved in democracy. And it's not seen as something extra that they could do on the weekend or a Saturday, but it's something that's just intrinsic at every area of their life, from sort of a micro level in school to then that macro level and wider political systems. I think that it's about as well politicians and decision makers seeing young people as a serious demographic. I think there's a real write-off of, well, it's a low participation, we're not going to bother because they're not going to sway votes. But I actually think, you know, we saw young people turn out in high numbers when they first got votes at 16 for the independence referendum, and that could have had a real impact on how the vote turned out. And I think that it's about continuing that momentum and getting it back, because I think we've really lost this sight of young people can actually make a difference in voting numbers. And I think it is a catch-22 because you need young people to be taken seriously for them to want to vote. But actually, even if young people are turning out in low numbers to vote, we've just heard that the UNCRC is now in Scots law. And that means that it doesn't actually matter if young people are voting in low numbers. They're still part of like our society, and they're still active contributors in many ways. And so the policies that are created for them still need to be sort of designed with them if it's going to work effectively. And I think that's why when we do our work, and we've had many campaign wins which happened outside of elections, and that's the power of change that you can see when you listen to young people, and young people see that change themselves. The amount of young people I talk to now who see a win from the free bus travel for under 22s, for example, that's something that happened between election cycles, which was really positive. And that's an example where young people then feel that they are listened to and that they are seen in democracy. And maybe they'll use it to go to a polling station at the next election.
I might expand as well on a point that Tamsin made earlier about education. And I feel like we are just repeating ourselves, but education, it can't be underestimated how powerful it is. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. But I think specifically looking at primary education, looking at where can we get that political literacy in there, because I was really fortunate that I was in like P6 when the independence referendum happened, and my teacher wanted us to get involved and wanted to educate us about it. And so she held like a mini referendum in the school and we all ran campaigns and stuff. And that was how I gained an interest in politics, because it was made accessible to me. And through that, I learned about even just the basics about what is government, what are political parties, what is a parliament. And it would astound you how many young people don't know what that is. They can't name who the Prime Minister is or what is a Cabinet Secretary or a Secretary of State, and giving young people a window into politics, making it seem less exclusive, say, hey, this is something you can understand from a very early age. The difference that that would make, I think, would be, it would change the way our political system looks, I think, in the long run.
I'm reminded of my predecessor as Stevenson professor, Andrew Lockyer, around the independence referendum. They did a bit of work following it, doing some analysis of the way different schools dealt with the independence referendum. So there's your experience, Olivia, but then there's, they documented the fact that there were many schools where they basically they said, we're not going to talk about it at all. Because it's a political issue and we have young voters here who are 16 and 17, and we can't be seen to be trying to persuade them. So it created that sort of tension there where some people had the advantage of schools going, hey, let's go all in, and other schools saying, no, we can't, completely hands off. So it's
That's also just a wider problem that runs throughout Scottish education systems, is that everything is inconsistent, really. Like, you have your sort of standards like pretty much everyone has access to higher English and higher maths and whatnot. But when we look at the things that fly sort of under the radar, like political education, but also sex education and human rights education and LGBTQ plus education, it is such a postcode lottery of what school did you go to? Did you happen to have a teacher who was interested in that and who dedicated time to it? And I think we do see the ramifications of that as young people become adults and move into society that is in a non-educational capacity.
Fantastic. Wait, I was gonna say,
Yeah, also, just when we were talking about the referendum and things, there are ways to teach young people about political issues without persuading them. We do it every single day. We are a politically impartial organization, but we talk about political issues. There are definitely ways that you can do that without persuading, persuading young people to think this or the other. It's just providing them with enough kind of knowledge and on like even the way that our parliament works and the way that our society works, for them to then go and form their own opinion. So yeah.
thank you. Graham.
Great, thanks, and thanks so much for your 4 talks. I've got 2 questions, if that's okay, Chris. One slightly specific, and it follows on from the earlier question about the commissioners. And when I think most people in policymaking will think of young people, they'll think of, well, it's education, and that's where the focus would be in the committees and the scrutiny and the broader debate. But what you're highlighting is actually it's about absolutely everything. And I'm wondering whether with the move toward things like gender-based budgeting, well-being budgets, climate change budgets, whether you see a value in having something which is a youth budget, and what are the full consequences of the decisions across that. And then the second question is actually a more personal question for you, and it's absolutely fascinating listening to you and really inspiring to hear you talk. I'd be really interested to know what you plan to do next individually, and do you plan to stay involved in youth work and parliamentary work? And yeah, I'd just be really fascinated to see and interested to see where you plan to go next.
I think on your first point around sort of, we do get that stereotype a lot around young people's issues. And so that's just not the case. So I once ran a consultation workshop all about tax, and people think young people wouldn't have any opinions on tax powers and stuff, but they did. And I also think that it's really important that that assumption is sort of challenged. And actually, the budget thing is really important, because while we're under such intense financial pressure at the moment, now more than ever, we need to have young people's views to inform what's going to be cut and what's going to be funded. And actually, there's loads of different methods to do that. Young people don't have all the answers, and they don't need to have all the answers, but we sort of campaign on different policies and why they're important, and then leave it to the decision makers to sort of figure that out. But we also can come with solutions. And so there's a model of participatory budgeting, which I really like, and it happens at local level quite a lot, and it's where sort of young people get to vote on what sort of projects should be funded and make the decision, and that's upheld. And it's sort of similar to how the wider sort of population of people aren't really included in a lot of budgetary decisions themselves. We see sort of things like community councils that are kind of left out of budget decisions. And actually it's about how do we consult the wider population as well on budget decisions, and how we're spending our money at different levels of government as well, local, national, and sort of regional as well. Does anyone want to add on that first question? No? On your second question, what do I want to do next? I think that's probably quite a big question for us all. I'm a student at the University of Glasgow, so in September I'm going to come back and finish my politics and sociology degree, and then sort of who knows what comes after that. I guess probably something in children's rights or human rights, but that's kind of up to find out. I don't know.
So I study social work at Glasgow Caledonian University, so I plan on finishing that degree, obviously, but I want to kind of go into something that's around policy making and around that kind of thing. But I want to have a couple of years in practice to kind of know if I do eventually go into policy making, I kind of want to have a background knowledge of who I'm making the policy for, and so I'm not going in blind, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do.
So I'm just in first year. I just started out with law and politics, so I've still got a while to go. But I think I'm really interested in like human rights law and how that plays out in society. So I think that's probably something I'd want to look at, and also to just continue to promote human rights to people, but especially young people, because I've seen firsthand how important and pertinent they are. And I think, yeah, that's how I'd like to continue.
Yeah, I hate this question because I really don't know. I like in the short term, I would love to continue doing stuff in Scottish politics, but there's also other things that really interest me, like international development. I would love to do something in that one day. I also know I want to learn more languages and I want to live abroad for a while, but I study Spanish and politics at Edinburgh Uni, and I'm currently on a year out trying to decide if I want to go back or if I want to continue working. So yeah, I'm just seeing where the wind takes me.
Thank you. My question is slightly related. I'm just wondering if there's been any research done about what people who've previously served in the Youth Scottish Parliament, what they went on to do, and did any of them continue in politics? What kind of impact has that had? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a broad church of where people end up. I think there is a misconception that everybody who would want to be in the Scottish Youth Parliament would want to be a sort of MSP or MP, but actually that happens, and it's happened in a few cases. So there's Ross Greer MSP, they've got people working as staffers for different politicians, also people who study law and maybe go into human rights work, and also quite a lot of young people who go on to work in community learning and development or be youth workers. It is quite a range. There's also a lot of med students in my experiences who are in the Scottish Youth Parliament, so they go on to become doctors, I guess. I think though the transferable skills that you develop in terms of critical thinking and public speaking are really sort of would serve you in any career. So yeah, I don't know if anyone's.
I guess kind of Scottish Youth Parliament for me personally has kind of really boosted my confidence. If you had told me 2.5 years ago that I would be giving a lecture at Glasgow University, I'd be like, no, that's not happening. So as you were saying, the transferable skills are like incredible. So like obviously it was a boost in confidence, public speaking, how to talk to other people and how to have kind of a critical conversation, whether it not being like you're biting each other's heads off is always a great thing to have in a workplace. So there are so many skills, and I think there's that very massive misconception that we all want to be politicians.
Any last burning questions? We are basically out of time, but I'll just make sure nobody else wanted to come in. No, I think that's us then. Right. Well, can we thank all four of you? Thank you so much. It was really, really interesting to hear about your work, what you're doing, and the approach that the Scottish Youth Parliament takes. And I think, quite a few lessons can be learned for other institutions from it. So thank you very much. So can we thank them all in the usual way? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you coming. Thank you. Thanks. You can breathe. No.
Thanks so much.